Chris Brown here at No Nonsense Know-How. Today working on a 2008 Ford Focus that was towed in with a no start condition. Now these 2008 to I believe 2012 Ford Focuses are notorious for starting problems, and it could actually be a multitude of issues. So I figured I'd make this fast-paced video and show you guys some quick tests so you can verify the problem and get your car fixed quick. First step, we're gonna wanna make sure our security light goes off down there in the left corner there. So go ahead and put your key in, put it in the run position. You see that's on, and then it goes ahead and shuts off. So that's good. Now you can see when we try to start this thing, doing nothing at all. The first quick trick that really helps with these Fords is if you push the key in and then try to turn it, or you turn it and then push it in real hard. If it starts, then you have a worn out ignition housing, or it could actually be the ignition switch I'm going to show you as well. But you can see even when doing that, this one doesn't start at all. Now, even though that ignition lock and switch are the most common problems, I want to verify that my battery, PCM, starter motor, and starter solenoid are all good. And a quick way to do that is you pop these tabs up on your fuse box here, come in here, and well, let me just show you. This is the starter relay. This is the starter diode. And so what I like to do is I pull this diode out of here, and if you leave it just barely connected, we're gonna take, I'm using a power probe here. I guess you could use really a small wire, a fused wire running from your battery to do this too, but power probe really comes in handy. And so on the left side of this diode, you see I have a ground there, and when you turn your ignition switch, 12 volts should be sent to that, which then goes through this diode to the computer. Computer sends signal to the starter relay, and then of course your starter and battery are good, it will start. So if I apply 12 volts to that, this thing should start if all those systems are good. And look at that, it starts right up. Now if that didn't work for you, moving right along, I've never seen one of these diodes actually go bad. Comment below if you have seen that. But the next thing you would want to check is your starter relay, and the easiest way to check this would be pop it out and then swap it with another one and try it out. Or you can take your power probe and do a similar test. You can see this side here is 12 volts. So this should be the starter side. That's ground right now. If I hit that, see, there you go, it'll start up. So that means, now if you do that, if you put 12 volts right where I just showed you and it's still not doing anything, then you're gonna wanna, well, obviously check and make sure you have a good battery. But then you're gonna wanna move on to the starter motor, because you more than likely have a bad starter if that's the case. Not going to go into that in this video because you can see my starter's okay. And I printed out this wiring diagram just so I can show you a few things here on what I was just talking about. This here, fuse 27, that's in your left side under the dash there. That's in your fuse box. You'll want to check, make sure that's what sends 12 volts to your ignition switch. And then when you turn it to the start position, it sends 12 volts, like I said, over to that diode, which in turn sends 12 volts down to the PCM, which then in turn energizes the solenoid here. And when that starter solenoid is energized, provided it's getting a ground from the transmission range sensor, it's going to bridge. Of course, you want to make sure this fuse 11 is good inside of the battery junction box there. But if that's good, then it's going to bridge this and send 12 volts over to the starter motor. If you're getting 12 volts at this brown, brown, green, or black wire, a brown green wire at the starter, if you're getting 12 volts there and it's still not starting, then you have a bad starter motor, or a bad connection on this red, or a bad, well, there is no fusible link on there. So yeah, that is everything in the whole system. So let's button this up and move down to the ignition, give you some tips on that. Okay, so we got a bad ignition switch or housing. You're going to remove these 3 5.5 millimeter bolts from the bottom, one here, there, and right here. I used a Milwaukee M12 ratchet, 5.5 millimeter socket, and with those off, you can then take your fingernails under here or a screwdriver and just kind of pop this top piece off, just like that. And then the whole top should just kind of snap right off of there and pull out of there. Next, you're going to take your hand down on this cover here and just give it a good yank down. Once it folds down, just slide it off of the bottoms. It kind of just snaps right there and there on the bottom there. Okay, coming up here, you pull this off, and then you got your steering lock here. You can fold that down and just kind of finagle this thing out of here. If you come down the bottom, just kind of twist it sideways, it'll come out of there. And now this is our ignition switch here. So, quick test on this. You are going to take a screwdriver and, well, I might have to put my phone down, but you're gonna push in right there. Yeah, you see that released? And then come in on the top side, do the same thing, pushing toward the camera here. And I'll show you what those look like. But once they've both released, you can grab it from the back side here, kind of pull it toward you, and then you can slide that whole piece out of there. Now what I was pushing on, you see what that scratch is on those? You're just pushing those little quick releases there. All right, with this switch hanging off, we can now take our key, put it in the ignition into the run position, and if you take a screwdriver about this size and turn this to the start, the car should start up. It does. All right, fine and dandy. Now, how do we know if it's a worn out ignition switch or the housing? Well, the way I like to check is with my key in there, I will try to get in here and wiggle this back and forth. You see how that has all that play? I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but basically the key's got a lot of play before this thing starts turning. And so what happens is the internal mechanism inside that connects the lock cylinder over to here, it just gets slop in there and worn out. And what it's doing is it's not turning this far enough to start the vehicle. All right, next day here, I'm going to show you how to install this new OEM Ford ignition housing or module, whatever you want to call it. This comes with the new ignition switch on it. I forget where I left off, so let me just show you here a couple tips for you. You can get one of these aftermarket, and you can actually rebuild the internals inside of here. I'll put a link in down below. It's about $40 for the parts that wear out. I'll show you what those are here in a little bit. But if your ignition switch has wear in this plastic, you're definitely going to want to replace it if it's all chewed up and kind of worn out in there. And it's also important to note that this ignition switch, it only goes in one way. You see how this side is a little bit wider than that side? Well, if you look at this, same thing, you got a wider side on there. So if you're just putting the switch on yours, make sure you line that up properly before snapping it in. Now, if you look at other videos online, some guys say you have to pull the steering wheel off on this, and you actually don't. I'm gonna just do a rundown and show you the quick way on how to replace these. The trickiest part is getting this bolt out up here, and you can see I've already got mine loose, because what that is a security bolt. And if you could use any bolt if you want. It's an 8x125 thread pitch, it looks like. But if you get the proper one from Ford, it's a security bolt, 8mm head on it, and when you retighten this back down, it'll just snap the head off and then look just like that. But the easiest way to get that off is quite simply taking a cold chisel like this, and you just give it a good whack with a hammer on there. It'll bite in, just like you can see where it bit in on that one. And that's, for me, has always been a really easy way to get these off. You can also take a die grinder or cut-off wheel or hacksaw and cut a slot in this thing. But of course, with the steering wheel on, that's kind of in your way. So the cold chisel works pretty good to get that off. Next, you're gonna have 3 of these 5.5mm bolts. You can use a socket. You're gonna have one right here, one right in here, which is a little bit tighter to get to. I used this shallow with a wobble extension on it to get to that one. And then one on the underside that goes in right here. And once you get all those out, you can actually kind of wiggle this back and forth. You have some play in this piece, so I should be able to slide this out of here now. Also use a little pocket screwdriver on the tabs of your immobilizer. You got a little tab here and one on the bottom. That just kind of snaps right onto the end of this. And you can just let that dangle down here. These are pretty delicate wires, so be careful. You'll also want to take a body clip tool like this, or a pair of diagonal cutters, and unclip this Christmas tree from here, and then take this wire harness off on the left side here too. And now we should be ready to drop this whole thing out, unthread this screw the rest of the way, and you kind of want to push up on this a little bit, slide this down, and see, because this has to unhook from underneath this plastic here, but with all that off, should just slide right out of here. And it just kind of finagles around the outside here. And that's pretty easy. No steering wheel removal needed. In the center here, when you're putting this back on, you could actually leave the key in the on position if you want to retract this all the way. But this whole aluminum block here, you got to make sure that seats properly in the bottom of the steering wheel before you go clamping this thing down. And just make sure that this slides under the plastic. Now we just have to swap this key switch over to the new one. So insert your key and then take a pick like this or a small punch, and in this hole right here, apply light pressure and turn it until you feel it depress, this pick depress a little bit, and then you can kind of just pull this thing right out of there. And yeah, put it in the new one. Just got to make sure that this D is lined up properly with that D, you know, this piece right here where my finger is. And if it is lined up properly, you should be able to just slide her right in there, a little bit of wiggling, and boom, good to go. And ready to toss this new one back in. Like I said, I would leave it in the on position so that's retracted, and then just finagle that back in there. Now when you're putting this back in there, you shouldn't have to force anything. If you wiggle it into place properly, everything should seat. Make sure all your bolt holes are lined up for those 5.5 millimeter bolts, and this clamp, it should be basically shut all the way before you go putting this bolt in. If it's not and you got to clamp it down, then you don't have something set right. Make sure to put a little blue Loctite on this bolt, no matter if you're using this one or an aftermarket bolt, and then thread that back down. And like I said, on this security one, you just tighten this until it snaps off, like so. Okay, got the wire harnesses all back into place, got the immobilizer on, everything tightened down, all those screws, and now this should start right up. And there you go, just like that. And now you can just button it up by putting this lower steering column cover on, snap the top on, and secure those 3 5.5 millimeter bolts, and then snap this down here into place by, you know, hooking it on these first, and then folding it up so these clips snap in. And like I was saying earlier in the video, you can actually rebuild this lock cylinder instead of buying a whole new one. I'll plug a link to another video I seen. For $40 you can get this whole new joint here, which is to show you here what actually wears out. This is the key side over here. You can see this thing's like a kind of like a little U-joint on an angle, and it's actually got a little broken off casting there, and this just gets slop in it, and then you get slop between here and the key tumbler too. So that's what goes wrong. You can rebuild these though. And that'll wrap it up. Now you've fixed your Ford and you understand how the ignition system works, hopefully, in case you have any future problems with it. Tried to keep this pretty short, although I think it ran on fairly long this time. So especially with the Diag stuff in there. But anyway, like usual, thumbs up, subscribe, comment down below, or any of that kind of stuff. And until next time, Chris Brown here, No Nonsense Know How. I'll see you later.